Blessings, beautiful people. We'd like to welcome you back to another installment of the other N word, N being nuance. I am your co-host, the wise one's name Reflect, and I'm gonna kick it to my co-host so he can introduce himself.
What's up, world? It's your boy Prometheus. I'm here to steal fire from the gods and give it to the people. Let's do it.
Yeah, so we're gonna apologize for this long break, man. It's this thing called life, hits you in many different ways and shapes and angles. And believe it or not, man, once you get over 40, the life doesn't slow down. It seems to only get faster. So many more things I have to take care of. But my man Prometheus, man, pulled me up off of the shelf and dusted me off and said we got to get back at it, man. So today we want to actually just have a quick little dialogue and share some perspective on this upcoming voting cycle. 2024, like any voting cycle, is supposed to be the one that determines the fate of the world, right, as we know it. So the cool part about it is I am an absolute dead center voter. I'm very, very conservative on some aspects, and then on some others, I'm liberal and pro. He currently resides left to center. So you guys are going to find out there's a few things that he and I see eye to eye on, but then like with anything else, there's some things that we're going to diverge on. But in the spirit of just good quality debate, we're just going to share our perspectives, share our anticipations, share our thoughts on how it can go either way, and then we'll back up out of it like we always do, and get to the next episode. So um, me being the resident historian here, right? I'm always very cautious when I hear these statements that this election is the one that's gonna determine X, Y, or Z, right? I understand that there has to be a play up for the elections because for the most part, we have a dull, very lethargic voting population here in the United States. And so without trying to stir up some sort of caution or some awareness or some fear, a lot of people won't even tune in until it's time to vote. And in some cases, they'll vote just based on who their parents or who their loved one, their spouse is affiliated with, and not necessarily vote in their best interest. But for me, I'm very fascinated by the voting cycle. I'm a constitutionalist, and going back and just looking at how the State of the Union was back in 1789 and how it is right now in 2024. Believe it or not, folks, there's more similarities than there's differences, right? I think we want to, always try to push the needle forward, and we want to feel like we're moving in the spirit of progress. But as it relates to this thing called politics, it's been the same way since the founding fathers put this thing together. So we're gonna talk some Trump, we're gonna talk some crazy Joe, right? We're gonna talk some woulda, coulda, shouldas, right? And then we might even squeeze in this conspiracy theory about if Joe gets elected again, reelected, and he croaks, and what it would look like for my girl from the O, Kamala, to get in the office. So we're gonna dance around a little bit, so bear with us, right? One thing about he and I, we both got beautiful minds, right? We both got highly opinionated thoughts, but we got a high respect and high regard for one another. So, we're just gonna play this thing out. And so I know that in previous elections, you and I have both talked about always being more in tune and caring more for the local and then the state level politics, and then some of the lower echelon national politics, and not necessarily being so swept up in the presidential election, right? But here's my question I got for you, bro. 2016, we got Donald in office, right? Seeing his body of work, a good 4 years of body of work before it was time for him to get out, right? Before we even inject January 6th into the equation. Now that we have a opportunity for a sitting president left office and is coming back to try to vie again for a second term, do you think that this time around people are uh, comfortable, if not for lack of a better word, with Donald Trump's politics and his ideologies enough to vote their best interests, or do you think that there's still individuals that are off put by the way in which he speaks and the way in which he conducts himself at the podium versus what he does while in office?
So this is what I believe. Simple answer on that one. I think there's a core of people who there's nothing he could do they would ever give him credit. They would ever give him credit for or give him a high five or an attaboy for. And that's really the dangerous and the disgusting part about politics and the American version of it is that we ride behind our politicians and our party of choices if it's your favorite sports team. Like me being a diehard Eagles fan, I will never support the Cowboys. I will bet on a JV team going up against the Cowboys before I ever root for the Cowboys. And you see that in politics, and why that's dangerous is that now that Trump has a body of work that you can grade him on, if you can get past the uncouthness, you can see where there were policies in place that did benefit. Now, we can debate who benefited or how it benefited or the reason behind it, but he does have a body of work now to run up against or to be used against him or for him. In terms of Biden, I think in 2020, people cast their vote for Biden. I don't think there were two outside of your loyal team Democrat. And again, these people who are team Democrat are going to vote for anybody who's a Democrat. That D matters more than the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a lot of people who are center or middle of the ground voted for Biden because they believed in Biden. Because if you do a little history going back to 2004, 6, and 8, Biden was the liberal Trump before there was ever a Trump. Biden was good to say something, and he still says shit where you got to look around like, hey, man, we don't talk like that anymore. So he can be just as uncouth as President Trump. But however, since Trump is the louder one in the room, it's kind of one of those things. If you're an asshole, but there's a louder asshole, you can kind of lay in the shadows like, hey, I might be an asshole, but I'm not a jerk, or I'm not a dickhead. So I don't think people pulled the lever for Biden out of like, there are people who just believe riding with Biden was going to make their life better. I think they were just so disgusted with the circus that Trump brings with him that they were hoping that anything is better than what we have. Now, what is if you identify liberal or Democrat, what the problem was that Trump said when he left office he was coming back. I'm from the school of thought if a person tells you what they are, who they are, you need to shut the fuck up and listen. I think the left wasn't prepared to really understand what that was because they were out electric slide in the street. If you remember 2020, there was a lot of things going on with in terms of race relations and the police. So there was a lot of other things that were kind of the oxygen thief in the room. So with the exception of people who play it, who are like news junkies or politic junkies, C-SPAN watchers and talk radio listeners, it was easy for Trump saying he was coming back to be dismissed. And then people, the left swore like out of the 1,000 charges he's got, they were determined something was going to stick. And he was going to get hauled off and either permanently disbarred through some sort of legislation, or he was going to be locked away in handcuffs, thus thereby disbarring him from ever running for office. Surprise, surprise. None of those things happen. You can argue if it's a witch hunt. You can argue if he's guilty. However, until he is convicted in a federal court of a federal crime, he's got just as much ability if he can do other things to put his name on the ballot and run for president. I personally think the left lost the ball on this one because if Biden was supposed to be the stopgap, they had a responsibility to the party to say, okay, we got Biden in here, but he's not going to be the horse we bet on for the long run. But politics is one of those funny monsters where people, I don't think they don't look 2 years in the future. They look, we won, and now that we won, winning is about dominating. So as long as we win and we have our tools, we're going to bully the pulpit until we can't do it anymore. So there's no strategic vision on how do I plant these seeds so that even when my guy's not here, we can still get our things to come to fruition.
Right. And so you make a very, very good and distinct point that I want to circle back to, right? When the 2020 election came about, there was this fervor from the left that by any means necessary, Donald Trump needed to be voted out of office, right? And what I mean by that is an elected Democrat would be elected in, and he'd be out of there, right? And even before we even delve into all the accusations they levied toward him and all of the lawsuits and all that kind of stuff, there was this sentiment that, hey, you know what, whatever it takes to get him out of office is what we're going to do. And what they did was they dusted off a guy that was disenchanted, right? Had already ran his course, had already took his ball and went home and was frustrated because he had ran for president before, right? And
3 times,
hadn't,
right?
yeah, and hadn't been the nominee, and then was bypassed again by Hillary Clinton, right? And so, if you recall, we had a conversation about this a few years ago, and I said, listen, what you're seeing out of Joe, the fact that he's showing his cards, he's not. There was this running joke about him running this campaign out of his basement. That dude wasn't going to do any favors to the Democratic Party because he understood that the only reason why they had even circled back and were entertaining him was because at that point in time, America at large was only comfortable with two elderly white men vying for the presidency. That was the reality of it. They put a lot of diversity on that stage through the Democratic Party through their primaries. And all of those people that stepped up, they had their moments and then they fizzled out. We had everything from women to black women. We had Asian American men stand on the stage, right? We had very, very
Dang.
moderate Democrats that weren't really hyper left in there. They had Bernie Sanders, Bill to Burn, right? We had that Democratic primary had pretty much a hodgepodge of every single type of person that you could imagine to represent on the left side in the Democratic Party. But look at what the American people that were Democrats, registered Democrats, at that point in time panicked. They didn't think that any of those candidates, and I believe it was 18 at that point in time, somewhere in between 14 and 18 at that point in time. They didn't feel comfortable with any of them. So look what they did. They literally said, well, let's just find our version of Donald Trump, right? And so Joe knows that. Joe's a career politician, 40 plus years in politics. He understood that, so he showed his ass. He said, I'm not going to get out on the campaign trail and go out and work hard and sweat and answer a bunch of questions and belabor. Like y'all had me enthused 15 years ago when I really, really wanted this. Now this is the opportunity for the bucket list, so you take what you can get. So the American people very, very hastily just decided, let's just throw away our best interests and let's just vie against the Donald, right? That was the only thing that the voting bloc that was center and center left were being fed through news and media. And look at the levers when it's all said and done by a very, very slim margin, right? By a very slim margin, Joe Biden became our president. Now, here's the problem that I have with that. You made another point that once he was there, he's a stopgap measure. I sincerely believe that they thought that they would be able to prop up Kamala in this process so that they could run on black woman, first black woman, right,
I
to ever
get the
take the
one.
Oval Office. Listen, every time I talk about her, I make no apologies about it. I make no apologies about it. That's I have an affinity for her just based on being loyal to the soil, right? And so if you think about what they did
From the town, she from the town.
from the town business, what they tried to do backfired. It wasn't not trying to look for another candidate outside of her or not really even thinking about, well, what if Joe deteriorates in this his first term? What they did was they overextended their hand. They put Kamala in the very, very worst position that anybody in government ever wants to be in, let alone the vice president. The vice presidency is a lame duck position. They don't really get to do too much of anything except for when there's a gridlock in the Senate and they get to cast that tie breaking vote, which she did a couple of times. They made a mistake by tasking her with border policy. There hasn't been a president since George Washington that has been able to successfully do border policies in which the majority of the country feels very, very comfortable with it. We all know that the border issue is a quagmire, but Joe Biden named her unofficially the border czar, put her down there in a position where it's a lose-lose situation. But now when she don't get the Mike Pence treatment, she don't, she don't get the Dan Quayle treatment, she don't get the George Bush Senior treatment. Like historically, the VPs don't really do too much of nothing, right? They're there because you want to have a ticket that's diverse, right? So that you get as many votes. But as far as being able to take on tall tasks and being able to really, really legislate, like the president is the one that has that through executive orders. The vice president usually just, you know, hey, they're the biggest cheerleaders. They're like, hey, she could have been 357. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh yeah, right. But they
Wait
put
a
her,
minute. Oh,
yeah, they put her in a very, very volatile and very, very politicized space that short of there being a miracle, she was gonna take an L. So what they did to her is they pegged her as being dumb. Like there was so many different ways in which mostly the right wing media painted this woman as being a bird brain, an idiot, not having political acumen, not being able to understand and articulate, just being a trophy. They went and dug into her, some of the previous things that she did. And so why I'm spending some time on Kamala is because I believe that Joe Biden, they were comfortable with Joe Biden being there for 4 years because that was going to be their next move. But because they weren't able to leverage her as being able to do some things that are effective and some things that are presidential, they aren't going to dare make mention of having her out in the forefront, right? She's been relegated to, well, what if Joe croaks? Are we really going to be comfortable with her being second in command, stepping up? But what I find interesting is that we find ourselves at the same exact crossroads, but I anticipate it being the polar opposite. I think that there are enough people that on both sides and in the middle are saying to themselves secretly, because remember, people weren't out and out voting for Trump. It was like once they called them deplorables and name shamed them, people were just smiling on the social media and was like, hey, I'm not gonna say nothing, but when I go in that ballot box, I'm voting for Trump. Now, right? People are going, I've been hearing all over the place. People aren't out really saying it to be criticized, but there's a feeling that people by any means want Joe Biden out of there, right? So what that might mean is that either you throw off, which unless it's a spades game, doesn't help your team, or you just boss up and you vote for whoever you feel represents your own best interests, right? That's what you should do as an informed voter. You should cast your ballot towards whoever has more in alignment with your values and what you as an individual espouse, and then let the politics shake out. So I'm getting this sense that there's enough people that are going to say, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get Joe out of there.
what if I got a question, right? So let's take it back to 2020, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying this before we knew who was going to be the Democratic nominee in 2020. I said I think because I think what anybody should have learned, and if they didn't learn in 2016, they damn sure should have learned in 2020. If they don't remember 2000, the Electoral College picks the presidency. So unfortunately, if you don't live in certain states, I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but like for example, you live in California, you could be Republican through and through and pull the party and pull the lever from red all the way down. You may be able to get like a district attorney Republican elected, but generally speaking, but you're riding with Biden whether you want to or not. So with that being said, I remember saying to a friend of mine, I might have been you in 2020. I think Biden was the only one or the only person who, electorally speaking, could beat the incumbent President Trump. Because I did believe that Biden, because he is Scranton, PA, he is he can speak Ohio, he can speak Michigan, he can speak Pennsylvania, he can speak to those electoral college battleground states that it's going to come down to your Wisconsins, your Michigan, your Ohio, your PA, maybe now Arizona's in play. So that being said, I think Biden was the one who, because again, while Andrew Yang had some great points, the hardcore left didn't like him because Yang's a businessman, so he wasn't going to go but so far left on economic policy. And he was so green, nobody really was going to vote for him. And then once you put him up against Donald Trump in certain states, Yang wasn't going to win. While Buttigieg could prove he knew how to talk correctly, and I liked about when Buttigieg had went on Fox News and went to enemy territory and pretty much made a spiel. I had a lot of respect, even though like any candidate that's comfortable enough to go sit in the enemy territory, you should listen to him. And he held his own, but unfortunately, we are not that evolved in the country where they're not voting for no gay guy. Doesn't matter how good he could have been president, whatever. Like once you got to go down into the states under North Carolina where they go to church a lot, that the gay thing is going to be the issue. And like I tell my diehard liberal friends who seem to just live in this liberal purist bubble, you have to be able to get votes where you're not normally going to get votes. That being said, I also wondered how come the Democrats didn't let Trump win that, like you said, throw off. But you can pretty much neuter president if you can control the House and the Senate. Like whatever happened, like I remember so what's his name? Tip O'Neill in the early 80s. He was a Speaker of the House when Reagan was the president. And they call them Blue Dog Democrats, Reagan Democrats, but really what they were probably conservative Democrats. They probably would have been Republican by today's standard of Democrat, but for that time they were conservative Democrats. But what they brought to the table was the real power. They were like, Mr. President, if you want to get anything of this shit done, you're going to do what we want because we have the numbers. And I think that game has been, and I mean, Newt Gingrich also showed that in the early 90s. And I think that game has been lost in this winner take all version of politics. We're at a point now where it's more important for your team to win at the top than it is to actually say, do we really want to get legislation passed? Because that's evident. Both parties, going back to 2014, have either had where they've had both houses and the executive branch and still didn't do shit. That's why I challenge all my Republican friends who are like, oh, Trump's going to get reelected. He's going to do all these things, blah, 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 blah. And I say, well, from 2016 to 2018, he had control of both houses. If a wall was going to be built, it could have got built. It could have got ran through and it would have got built if that was the issue, right? So it lets me know that really the game is just more to make bumper stickers and yell at the other side. I think the vice president kind of, I won't, like you said, how often do you really hear of a vice president? There's a few vice presidents throughout the history of this country that really kind of made a name for themselves before like they became the president because either they had senatorial connections or they were put in place because the president was considered sort of like Barack Obama and JFK. They were considered so immature and so green that the vice president they had needed to be someone who could go get shit done. That being said, I think sometimes it is unfair when you're listening to talk radio and they demonize current vice president because, like you said before, really the vice president, that's one of them cushy jobs. You just show up, don't break it, go to parades that the president don't want to go to, get your $400,000 a year, and go home. Right? No one really expects you to do much of anything, but just just be there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, president says, "Hey, we got to go meet the such and such, and I can't go. You're gonna go." You know what I mean? But now all of a sudden, there's this belief that somehow her, in her role of the vice president, again, and I'm gonna say, I don't know the full authorities of the office of the vice president to really tell you what she can and can't do. Because like the president can get on the phone and make things happen with a phone call. I'm sure the VP can get things done on the strength of being the VP, but what legality do they really have to do it if it's not supported here or there?
Well, those two positions are, well, actually, the whole executive branch is set up as a chain of command, and you know that's evidence even in um, how it's structured for when a president becomes incapacitated or dies in office, and when you start looking at the order of succession, right? So the way that the vice president really can exercise and flex some sort of power, like what I said earlier in the Senate chambers, right? The vice president is pretty much the president of the Senate, right? And there's the only one that has that kind of duality. The president can't walk into the chambers of the Senate or
Gotta
into
be
the House of
invited.
Representatives and say anything, right? But
Gotta be
everything
invited.
that happens, the vice president is there, right? And so as I'm hearing this unfold as you're talking, and I'm kind of collecting my thoughts and kind of thinking, kind of stringing them along through a through line so that I can articulate them in a way that is pretty succinct. I'm beginning to really, really feel like this is the absolute inverse of the 2020 election in so many different ways, right? And so I don't want us to brush over the electoral college issue, because now the electoral college conversation was a little bit different in 2020, right? There were only a handful of battleground states, and those states historically have flipped back and forth. The purple states had flipped back and forth, and it was pretty much up for grabs, right? And so the thought process was, hey, both candidates decided they were going to like hyper focus in pretty much just in those areas because can already count on each hand the other ones that had traditionally have been blue block and traditionally have been red block. But I'm not sure if you're aware of this now, but there are 3 states, and I don't want to name the states and be in error. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I know there are 3 states that are looking to really, really shake up this electoral college. Actually, the governors in 3 different states are looking to shake up the electoral college process, right? So there are some states where they have multiple electorates in there, and both
Maine and
the
Nebraska.
candidate both candidates can pretty much collect electoral college votes from the same state, just whatever districts and counties that they win in, right? But then there's a winner take
Nebraska and
all.
Maine.
Yeah, okay. So those two. So there's a winners take all type of format that is in states, and this is per state's rights, right? So the governor gets to decide how they're going to divvy up the electoral college vote. Now, here's what's really, really been talked about in all of the talking heads. I mean, every single talking head you can think of that's on the right, the conservative right, are really, really trying to petition those 2 governors to actually change to a winner takes all. I mean, from a winner takes all to separate it so that the votes can be split in that state. Because what that would do is that would make it, based on the mathematics, it would make it harder for the incumbent Joe Biden to really, really get to 270, right? And so that's one of the first things that they look at on the political side. For those of you that don't really follow electoral college, it's not just whatever president gets this amount and whoever gets this amount, whoever is higher wins. No, there's a threshold. You have to get 270 electoral college votes in
First.
order to be ushered into the presidency. And so
You
they're
gotta get it
already,
first.
yeah. And so they're looking at how can we disrupt this electoral cycle, right, from what it was in 2020? Because you got the same individuals that are still vying for the same battleground states. And states like Georgia and states like Arizona are still coin tosses, right? As long as you have this issue going on with, President Trump and whether or not he was actually trying to tamper with the electoral college process or not, that still hasn't played out to where there's some finality in it, right? But so that he still has access. The biggest issue that the Democrats have is they've been hoping that they can get these cases expedited so that there is a ruling so that they can go either way. Because if there's a ruling and he's found guilty in this, and that can take care of him in of itself. But anything that bleeds over past the election, he can be elected and he can be charged and sentenced, right? Convicted of XYZ, but he'll turn around and pardon himself. Right? And they know that. So the fact that they were trying to expedite all of these cases, like you said, they threw a blitz in there, try to get anything that could stick on him, anything that
Anything
they
state.
could
They was
do.
like, man, they was like Trump farted when he was 7 in class.
Yeah.
Get them out of
And
here.
so it doesn't look like any of those are going to be able to actually have a conclusion prior to the actual election day, right? And so that this thing about them trying them meaning the Republican Party or the conservative block of the conservative party trying to now, you know, maneuver in the electoral college is something that the average person doesn't care about, but this is huge, right?
No,
because
no.
because when you start making unprecedented moves in politics, it begets another counter to that, right? And there's
And the pro
already, go ahead.
I'm saying, and then what, which is weird to me because both parties do it. They don't mind bending the rules to suit them, but they don't realize one of the beauties of the American election game we have is that I don't care how much you lean right or left, eventually the shit does like this. So if you make it okay today that Republican governors can do whatever so they can get their guy in, cool. Now you have put a legal precedence on paper that 10 years from now, 3 cycles from now, when a liberal governor is like, hey, we're going to do the same thing, you didn't cry foul then, and now we have something that can go before the Supreme Court and be like, hey, y'all shut the fuck up when they did it, now shut the fuck up when we do it, which I think is really the part that really exposes just how much of a game our cycle is because there's really no like there's probably a few honest brokers in there somewhere, but most people are doing it for the thrill of the game and for the moment to win. Like I said, they want to win today. No one has a strategic mindset to think, how do I put things in place to either continue to win or I don't like again, if I was a strategist for either the left or the right, I would say throw away the executive branch. Throw it away. Get your Congress, get the Congress you want. He going to do it. He going to do what you want him to do, or he's going to be out of here the following election anyway. But again, we've forgotten that in America that the real power is the legislative branch. That's why they don't have term limits.
Right.
Let me say this though, real quick. I had a prediction, right? When uh, when Roe v. Wade was sent back to the states, right? I think so. Had nothing changed, right? I think Joe Biden would have been a lot lower in the polls, right? Because, like you said, there's an inverse, and people just want that guy out of here, right? There's even people who are diehard Democrats. They're not they're not impressed. They don't feel good about having to pull a lever for a Biden Harris ticket, right? But I think the Supreme Court sending Roe v. Wade back to the states was an immediate win for the evangelical side of the conservative party, but it's going to fuck them in the long run. It's going to make what could have been an easy win for the Republican cause a hard fought battle if they do win, because now what you're starting to see, and I think it is generational, you're seeing women in conservative states, not states like that go purple. We're talking about deep red states. What they're saying is, hey, listen, we don't like abortion, but what we really don't like is y'all having your hands because, for example, in states like in some states, it wasn't enough that there was a 15-week ban. I think I don't know if it came to fruition, but I think it showed up where Texas was saying they almost wanted to be like a woman had to pretty much show papers to leave the states that you were not pregnant. And if you knew that your neighbor went and had an abortion in another state, I mean, it was getting to the point where we were really now encroaching on liberties. And what I think women under the age of 50 are saying, whether they're liberal or conservative, they're drawing a line saying, hey, listen, this isn't an issue y'all need to deal with. We'll deal with this. And what could be an easy win, Arizona goes and does what a week ago? Reverts back to a law that existed when the Civil War was at the high side of the Civil War, and Arizona wasn't even a goddamn state, and women couldn't even vote. I mean, again, I don't think the liberal machine is smart enough to play that because they just fight different. But from a strategist standpoint, it's almost like, do you want to win? Come on, like you have an opportunity. Like the economy sucks. I don't care what the numbers say. When you go put gas in your car, or you got to go buy eggs, milk, and bread, no one's feeling when they're there. The economy's improving 3 points. I just spent $100 in the grocery store and I didn't buy any meat, right? But what could be an easy win for the right? They just determine like, and they're determined to die on that abortion hill. I know we're not really talking about abortion, but I think that is going to be the reason why it keeps the Democrats in play,
Yeah,
especially
I mean
if
it's relevant.
certain elected officials on the right can't shut the fuck up about abortion. And they're holding Donald Trump now to task. Like you said, you were proud of this Dobbs bill or whatever they called it when it came back to the states. Are you proud of this? And now he had to go on record and say, "Hey, I think Arizona went too far." But now Arizona's like, "Wait a minute, you gave us this." I don't know what you think.
No, I share that sentiment, and it's playing out. It really is what it is it's an indication that there's so much nuance in the states these days that it's become ever increasingly harder for political machines to get in front of something. Before they used to be able to just calculate and factor some things out and keep the guy safe or keep the person safe, right? But now there's so
Hey,
much
don't talk about
dichotomy.
this. Don't
Yeah.
do that.
Now there's so much dichotomy, and now there's and then you throw infighting in there, right? So it's not even enemy versus enemy. And so everything you say your enemy is going to reject. Now you have infighting even within your own party. So everything that you say might end up pissing off somebody within the party, right? So that takes what is a
You have
one versus
AOC,
one. Mm-hmm.
you have AOC, and you have Marjorie Three Names. They will
Yeah,
fuck up the party real quick. Everybody be ready to pass a bill, and they'll be
yeah,
like, "No, burn it
yeah.
down."
Right. And so listen, the abortion thing is front and center, right? What is speculated to be a high topic on in the one debate. They've gotten to the point where both candidates have agreed to one debate, right? Which is egregious in my opinion. That just shows that just shows that neither party really has this thing nailed down, right? Because
It
it
also shows that
traditionally.
they both recognize the fragility in their 75 plus year old
Oh yeah,
running horse. They realize like we can't have this guy in front of the microphone but so long before they fuck everything up.
yeah. No, that's a fact. That's a fact. But a large portion of there's speculated that a large portion of that debate is going to be centered on Roe v. Wade getting both or either candidate to actually take hard line definitive stances, especially with these weeks, right? The biggest argument is about the weeks, right? There's two sides of
Weeks.
it. There's that there's that anything past 15 weeks in that vein right there. But then there's also that third trimester, week 30, week 40 thing that's been cropping up because the liberal left has made a blunder by even introducing into this thing that a woman should have the right to just choose, even if it's late in her third trimester or she's coming to term two. And so trying to just say
Can
that,
I ask you a question
oh,
on that?
yeah, yeah.
And I don't know too much of that because I had asked that question on social media. Are there see? So I heard it framed, and Mayor Buttigieg said this when he was the governor of Indiana. He said, when that is a case for that to come up, we're talking about like late term abortions.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's because there's like some issue where the mother and child are going to die if she continues, like issues like preeclampsia
Yeah,
and gestational diabetes.
right.
It isn't just a woman waking up, as I understand it, 6 weeks before her due date, like, yo, you know what? I don't want this.
But see, that's where the devil is in the details. The legislation always has to be very, very broad, right? When you introduce too much specificity, then you're absolutely just excluding every other part of the voting population, right? So what the hardline stance has been from the left is that a woman should have a choice, regardless. There should not be preconditions to her choice. It's either she has a choice or she doesn't, right? The Republicans want to dice it up and slap it into weeks, right? Because their argument for pro life is the heartbeat. right? And all those things that follow that. I don't think anyone that would look at a late term abortion seriously would anticipate that someone just decided during week 38 they just don't want to have the baby anymore. So clearly it's going to be medical, or even it can even be something now in this day and age. It can be something that has to do with mental health, right? Because let's just say, and just allow me to play devil's advocate for a second. I'm not advocating for this on my own behalf. I'm just saying, let's just say that there's an individual that has not necessarily been in contact with their family and hasn't really did research or has strong ties and roots to their family tree, and they are exhibiting symptoms of some sort of mental illness. I mean, the ones that are hereditary, right? And then
Yeah,
they come to find
like
out,
severely
yeah,
genetically
yeah. And then they find out, mom and grandmom had traits of this, right? And through the last tail end of her pregnancy has showing signs and symptoms herself, right? I'm only mentioning this because this is not as simple as here is a communicable disease or here's something physically that can go wrong. The mental health piece is also something that has to be looked at. And we both know that that's not something you can just place your thumb on at any given point in time. Those things crop up and these things go into dormancy and recess and then surface at the drop of a experience, right? A lot of individuals are triggered into now realizing that they have some sort of mental health concerns, whereas otherwise it just hasn't been an issue for them, or they just, like in my generation coming up when I came up, there was really no conversation about mental health and mental illness, right? And so it
I
was
mean,
even laughable to have somebody talking about the crazy uncle, the crazy aunt, but we know that that's not just the scope of mental illness in the family, right? There's so many different and varied ways in which a person uh can be experiencing mental illness that now society says is worthy of us really taking a good look at and recognizing that these are the reasons why. So I say all that to say they didn't want to have a degree of specificity to say only under these circumstances at the late trimester because it didn't work in that first 4 to 12 week window they've been arguing about for the last 50 years. The argument for the last 50 years has been, well, 4 weeks may not show in a woman and she may not even know and not have symptoms of it and may not even have adequate health care and find out, only after week 12, but she should still be able to have the right to determine for herself, what she wants to do with the child. And so they realized saying, okay, well, can we say that it be from week 8 to week 12 has to be under certain circumstances, or can we have a cutoff at week 16? And that's too dicey, right? So that's where the left made that mistake of saying, let's just have it across the board. A woman should be able to determine even it's up to the last day should she choose to, and twirling the bra at the same time. That's where now it's an issue because no two people are going to sit down and really, really be like, yeah, week 38, yeah, she's just going to just decide and get up one day and be like, I'm tired of this. You know what I'm saying? Let's just go ahead and slide down the water slide,
I
and
think,
I'm being a little facetious, but in all
but
honesty,
not
that's
that.
where we find ourselves, right? That's
I
why
think,
this is the issue.
and I think where the also Republicans overplayed their hand is like, which lets me know that I don't want to say there's a lot of dummies in in high office, but there's a lot of people that are so caught up on the win that they don't do the history. Like, I didn't even consider that IVF would be an issue, you know. But now that some states are more hardline, no abortions ever, IVF now is on the table because, in theory, those are fertilized embryos that now have to be destroyed, which is technically terminating a pregnancy. But now you're telling people who cannot naturally conceive, hey, you cannot have a baby because the methods in which we could get you pregnant are against the law. And again, I'm sure there's probably somebody who's pro-life, 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 and they have no problem sitting in their pro-life sanctimonious space and telling that because they got their 20 kids and it's not an issue for them. But I think anybody, left or right, is a hard sell to go tell a parent, a couple that's trying to conceive, we know it's not your fault, but hey, that IVF thing, you're a criminal. And I think that's where I think when they sent, I think, again, when it was sent back to the States, there's supposed to be this yay we won moment, and no one thought about, well, what did we really win here? Because of that, what should have been an easy victory for the GOP coming into, like, it should have been a red fucking wave, right?
Well,
Because I
that's what they
mean,
said was going to happen in 22. They anticipated the red wave. We saw what happened.
but I think with but but I think one of the things that are really going to hold the red wave up is that issue. And then, so even if you take the abortion piece out of it, like let's just say the pro life community gets their way, like we don't want anybody to ever have an abortion, cool. When you start going into, okay, well, what are we doing with these IVFs? What are we doing in these cases? Then when the cases like somebody gets raped, somebody gets incest, like they gotta deal. Like, I mean, it became, or when Texas was, and again, I don't know if it was just the governor of Texas talking shit in the conservative safe space, or was there really a measure on the books to be like, hey, listen, we are going to criminalize women who leave the state, right?
Yeah.
Which means, well, then how do you prove a woman's pregnant when she leaves? Do now women leaving the airport in DFW have to have, hey, let me see your papers? Are they going to now deputize the Texas Rangers, the when like, I mean, no one thought
Well,
of this before, but now that you have to consider this, because even the most, like I said, I think what women are showing, and I love them for this, is that women under the age of 50, left or right, are like, yo, hey, that's a conversation we need to have. Like, I liked when Governor Haley or Ambassador Haley was still on a campaign trail, and she said some of them, because she's a mother and a woman and has had to face decisions. She was able to say it from a standpoint like, listen, we can be pro life, but we also need to be able to understand what we call it, the nuances. We need to recognize there will be a time when it's none of our goddamn business. I'm paraphrasing, and it's between the mother, and we can't be so party purist that we take that away. Of course, she was booed in certain spaces, but again, like I said, I think what could have been an easy red wave for 2024, if you're conservative or you identify as Republican and you want to see DJT come back and punish all the liberals, you might have fucked yourself on this.
well, again, and to bring it back full circle, that's where, this head to head battle that they have is very, very crucial in application and how it plays out. Like, I'm comfortable with any American citizen identifying with one or the other gentleman and deciding that that individual, espouses a majority of their way of thinking. And that's why they're going to pull the lever for that individual. Either way, because I feel like every single person that is a citizen of the United States should have an opportunity to vote for someone to represent their own interests. Where I'm having a very, very tough time with this election cycle, in addition to the 2021, is that people are hypocritical in their thinking, right? If you say that you're not looking at the candidate's policies as the measure of whether or not they are worthy of your vote, it's the character and the content of the individual and how you see them conduct themselves in the presidential space. Then you cannot point to the opponent side and talk about their voting record and their policies, right? Because you're saying that the number one criteria in which you're using for your ballot is the moral compass. Conversely, if you're saying that, you know what, I look at the policies of the person, I can stomach a person that may be immorally corrupt. Hell, people will tell you all the time, most of the presidents were found in scandals or their way of thinking
We, we,
was
we only see
definitely
it now
backward.
because of we only see it now because we got these. But back
Right,
in the day,
right. So my thing is if I seen a voting populace that was like, hey, you know what? I don't care what nobody say. This is my voice, my vote. I'm gonna cast it however I want to, and you can say what you want or whatever. I could live in that American space. But what I see is that everyone in the 2020 cycle, and individuals in the 2024 cycle are pressured to pretty much say out of their own mouth, depending on what room they're in or whatever social conscious environment they're in, something that won't get them attacked, right? And that does nothing for the democratic process. I mean, and that does nothing for good spirited debate, because what it does is it breeds fear mongering, it breeds intimidation, and most importantly, it breeds deception, right?
What if
For
it
us
was?
to
What if it's?
go
Sorry. What
ahead.
if it's always been like that, and we just
It's
kind of
it's always been
graduated
like,
into a space where we're old enough now where it's relevant, but 50 years ago it was still like that. It was just done different.
and I'm not saying that in
I'm
any
beginning to
given
think the game
election.
is I'm beginning to think the game is actually working as it was designed to work.
But I'm not. But what I'm not speaking towards the systemic aspect. What I'm talking about is the civil and civic aspect of it. What I'm saying is that, yeah, sure, you take marginalized people for example. Always had a hell of a time just being able to get into spaces to vote or to express their opinions about what they wanted, and were highly scrutinized. And we can talk about traditionally how the two-party system has been set up and what we've seen, right? What I'm saying is that there's such a convolution in the way in which people are willing to speak about politics. It used to be that, hey, you know what, people get into a shout match and you say, hey, that's exactly why I don't engage in politics, right? Because hey, once you start talking and you get into a little argument, somebody's gonna get heated, right? Politics and religion, two things you don't really delve into unless you're like you and I, who are spirited debaters, right? But what I'm saying is right now, the social and political implications of just talking about your politics could shipwreck your whole life. That part is what scares me. Because
And that's disgusting.
if you walk into a space where you're doing a damn good job at your job, but somebody wants you out of their building because of your political affiliation or because of the way in which you vote. Like there were people, remember last time there were people all through social media, it was like, oh, if I find out one of my friends or family members voted for Donald Trump, I'm not gonna talk to him no more. I'm gonna unfriend him, right? I'm saying this is actually created something that's even more dangerous and even more harmful to us as as a society. When when you get to a point where people are not even willing to get involved in and to think about and to factor out the political space because they're worried about their livelihood or they're worried about the court of public opinion so much. What that also does is it causes people to just disconnect from the political process whatsoever. You remember a couple of years ago that big buzzword was low information voter. What I'm saying to you is I feel like there's probably way more low information voters this time around than in
Fuck
2020. And it's not
fuck
just because these individuals are busy trying to earn a living. They ain't got time to think about politics. It's because they've been made to feel that there's no way I'm going to even invest in a space, a public forum, talking about my beliefs when it can permeate and move in outside of that space into my real life, affect my paycheck, affect my affiliation with these organizations. The way in which the spaces that I walk in, I may no longer be welcomed in. I don't think that on a national level, politics were ever this bad. We talk about it state to state, absolutely. But if me and you were in Nebraska, or if we were in Wyoming, or if we were in Florida, bro, there's still people that are like, I'm not saying anything. In Florida, they might be Democratic, but they're like, because the red wave, I'm gonna just chill out because I don't want hey, there's no tax out here, no property
what is
tax.
what's that? I still gotta work in this town.
Yeah. But that
Let me ask
wasn't
you
that wasn't a criteria across the voting population
I
to the degree it is.
I think you highlight, and this I want to stay a little bit on topic, but we can go on a tangent. I think you highlighted something larger than that. So I remember we were taught you don't talk about politics and religion, but I remember my grandfather used to say before he passed on, that's bullshit. They were raised in a time like you talked about everything. And I think we were probably the first safe space generation with that because in not doing that, it got us comfortable not having uncomfortable conversations. got us comfortable in living in our own echo chambers. And then with living in your own echo chamber, if you don't push the envelope to go out of it before you know it, everybody starts to sound like you, and you begin to think that you're right, not because you're right in the scientific method, but you're right because everyone else around you is an amen committee. And I think that's part of the problem. But I also now I'm part of the party of apathy. I will admit I'm definitely center left until I get around some real left people. Then I'm probably fucking a neocon. And that's the beauty of, I guess, the whole American political system is that talking to people in my most comfortable space, I identify center left. But I also recognize if I get around some real liberals, even I don't want to fucking be around them. I'd be like, you know what? I'm going over here with these guys. I said that part to say that maybe that's that's the game. It was designed to keep people low information voters because if we really understood the power in not necessarily your individual vote, but the power of collective government, the business of government, we would take it serious. We would recognize that it's a lot more to getting legislation than it is to have your senator of choice making stupid ass statements that will go nowhere. You know, it's a time and a place to be a purist, and there's a time and a place like, look, we gotta get shit done, right? Like taking it back to remember when Joe Biden won and then there was a slight congressional senatorial majority. And I remember telling my friends, because I got some very hardcore liberal friends, I was like, how liberal do you think Joe Manchin really is? We're talking about a Democrat from West Virginia, a 60, 70-year-old white guy from West Virginia at that. Not saying he can't be liberal when compared to people in his own state, but how liberal do you really think that guy is for the agenda that you want pushed? And if you really believe he's that liberal, then you haven't been paying attention. Which again is why if I were either party, I would always be looking at what can I pick, what can I cherry pick the other side? What issues can I cherry pick votes on the other side? Because if your majority comes down to 51 people or 52 people believing what you want to believe, you don't have no goddamn majority. Not by the rules of the Senate where they have to have, what is that 2/3 majority thing? Because a lot of people, when you say majority, you're like, oh, I got to get 51 people and I win. But I think there's a lot of things for
That's called a
procedural. It
simple
has to go,
majority. Yeah, that's called
yeah,
a
but it
simple.
has to go 2/3 majority for like the procedural stuff, even to get things to the floor or something. I don't understand all the rules. It's been some years since I was in civics. But what I was getting at is that if I were in charge of either party, Speaker of the House, party chair, whatever, my agenda would always say, okay, what issues do I know I can snipe a couple Republicans? But instead of that, everybody retreats into their safe space and they come up with things that you know aren't going to fly. I mean, it sounds good to make a speech in your safe district about we're going to do this, this, and this, and your echo chamber is going to tell you, yes, go to Washington and do it. Then you go to Washington and you're like, why'd you even bring that bullshit here? You fucking knew the other 434 of us were not going to agree to that shit, or you even knew the other 49 of us aren't agreeing to that. And again, but there's no incentive to legislate. So because there's no incentive to legislate, we have the government, in my opinion, that we have today because we deserve it. And I know I kind of went all the way around,
Nah,
but
I like that though, because what you're doing is this is what we do here, right? We unpeel some shit, right? We peel back some layers. We look a little bit deeper into, said topic, said thing. It's interesting that what you posited about there being gridlock politically. Historically, there have been some pockets of space where compromise was the name of the game and they got it done usually after some sort of tragedy or some sort of some war effort or something where you got to put your American cape on, and put down your
we're all
political
Americans
stuff,
today.
right? But I think I just made a connection in my mind when you were saying that. Here's my real concern and fear with what I said before about the fact that individuals are now going silent. They're going dark with even their thought processes about it. We see that Washington becomes gridlocked and it goes to shit when they're not willing to compromise. A society in which there's not a space for conversations and compromise is a lot more damning than a government with no compromise, because we see each other way more than we see party officials, way more than we see office officials, way more than we see staffers, way more than we see any person that moves around in the realm of government. We see each other the moment we walk outside our house and hop in our car, right? Turn it on and turn and look to the left or right behind us. We see someone. And the fact that now it's becoming a lot more of a commonplace in the outside, everyday, normal world for there to be radio silence on how you feel, what your views are, what you would like to see, what you would like to advocate for. That only leaves the talking heads to further make these decisions for you and just slap it into the social media stratosphere. And you just have individuals that are no longer even living as citizens. Like, citizenship is not just you being born in a place. I mean, legally, yeah, by definition, where you're born, that you become a citizen or something, but citizenship is participation. If there
Boom.
is no participation, then I would argue that you shouldn't be talking about citizenship outside of when you get ready to move in and out of the borders, right? And so there are too many people that otherwise, there was always that 20-60-20. There was those 20% that was just all in the politics, no matter what generation you think about. Then there was those 20 that was completely disinterested. They wanted to be rebel rousers and they wanted to fuck shit up and they could care less about whatever it is you're talking about. If you say left, we're going right. You say right, we're going left. But there was that bulk 60 that still found time to try to figure out what this thing meant to them on all these different levels. But now that that's been eroded away, there's no ground to stand on to hold our politicians accountable for their lack of compromise. If in your own community, in your own spaces, in your own cyber world, you're unwilling to compromise in anything. And then even worse, you're unwilling to even speak your aspect. I guess just the philosophical philosopher in me is just, worries about stuff like that more than the bricks and mortar, more than the black and white. The nuance to it all is that America is losing its citizenship. And I think that's what in this election cycle really, really worries me.
We should do it. We should put a pin on that conversation for another day, man. I'm gonna tell you what I have done in my part, right? I'm probably a disruptor to it because I am part of the party of apathy. So I'm gonna go ahead and say for now, it will either be President Trump or President Biden, unless some really major shit happens in the next 4 months. Whoever wins will do it without Prometheus's vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, once you get past the top two, president, vice president, I do vote, or I will vote. I am a disruptor. For example, I will vote against my representative if he's been in there longer than 3 terms. Because I feel like, hell, what is the worst the other guy can do? He might fuck something up, but in 2 years, representatives got to leave anyway. So, and I would always challenge my friends to do that, because if we did a poll right now, everybody would say Congress is broke, Congress sucks, right? But yet, how many people actually vote against their sitting Congress?
I would venture to say not a lot, unless they're having experiences some
Unless it's a
hardship.
unless it's a scandal,
Yeah.
or they're just like, let's say you come from a place and your senator is a Republican and you're a diehard Democrat and you've always voted against him. But I would challenge anybody who hears this: if your representative and your senator has been there longer than 2 election cycles, or 3 for the representative and 2 for the senator,
Mhm.
vote the other guy. Pull a lever. Just, if for nothing else, send that motherfucker a goddamn lesson. Because Congress has they have several jobs. One or a few jobs is the budget. And I cannot understand why we keep operating under CRs. I know why. CRs are continued resolutions. When simple math in my mind says if you can't get a budget passed, then all of you should be fucking, it should trigger an automatic recall, meaning you all are barred from federal office at the next cycle. Because one of the fucking reasons you were sent there was to keep money in the pocket to pay the fucking. So if you become so purist and so moralistic that you can't even compromise, there's a place for you. That's called the pulpit, right? You're so righteous in your cause and noble in your cause, you shouldn't be in Congress. You shouldn't be in politics anyway. You should be in the pulpit because that's where you get to make your speech, sit on high, and tell the world what they should and should not do based off of whatever you've been guided to do. But if you come to pass laws because you're passing laws not only for the people that think like you, passing laws to benefit all Americans. So you need to sometimes be able to say, okay, hey, listen, I got to buck my party on this one, or I got to go with the party with this caveat, or you know what, I'm going to abstain from this vote because this bill came across my desk, and it's a shit sandwich, and I want nothing to do with it. If it passes, great. If it doesn't, I want history to say I had nothing to do with this. But in wrapping up, I want to ask you, what are 3 issues you look forward to this election? Because we're all issue voters, whether we say we are or not. There's 3 things we generally like care. What are the 3 things that reflect, looks back on, and be like, hey, listen, when I go in this booth, I close that curtain. Right person talk about this shit, they might get my vote, even if it's unpopular.
So, 2 of the 3 fall in the realm of economics. What I'm looking at in particular is what the attitudes towards the average everyday cost of living is, right? And I know that a lot of that still is a states thing, but as it relates to the systems in place and manufacturing, those kind of things, I'm looking to see. I'm interested, even though I don't believe that Joe Biden will touch on it, I'm interested to see if he is willing to unpack this Bidenomics trip that he's been really waving the pom poms about.
Hey,
I'm
we build
looking,
back better,
yeah,
asshole. Okay.
I'm looking for him to articulate how outside of Wall Street his economics is looking on Main Street. I'm looking for that.
Mm,
The second thing, as it relates to economics concern, has to do with the green energy issue, right?
okay.
I have become a lot more privy to green energy policies and politics, more so now than I ever been. You know, just as you get up there in age, you find yourself with different interests and in different circles of conversation and become privy to some things. And just if you're smart, you just run out and you look with your own 2 eyes and listen with your own 2 ears and try to figure it out. Because I really think that there has to be a decision made on whether or not we're going to abandon fossil fuels, or if it's truly best to still keep them in some capacity and then just build out capacity in some of the green. It seems to me that up to this point, it's been all for one or all for the other. I'm interested to see what both candidates are willing to say or concede about both paradigms, because I myself, I personally think that there should be a mix of all, right? The third thing that I'm concerned about is the border. And so I make no bones about this. I believe in sovereign
So
borders.
when you say border, are you looking from a like, yeah, go a little bit more. That's one of those issues where people are like the border, but what is it about
Yeah.
that?
So here's the thing. You have one side that's saying that the border is in shambles, and you have another side saying, no, it's not. There's still some things for us to be working on, but it's not what the other team is painting it. That's just a lot of their hyper rhetoric, right? I'm looking for some detailed plans as to what the border policies should be. Should they be? And so I'll give you some examples. There's an argument that if they just returned to focusing on and supporting the 2016 policies without even adding anything, it would take care of some of these things, meaning that there's an argument that what's happening is that the border policies just aren't being followed. And that's why we're having all of these issues. So I'm interested to hear from the left whether or not they're willing to acknowledge that there are things on the books border wise that they just have decided for whatever reason not to actually enforce. I want to see if there's a level of transparency there. But then I'm interested to hear from the right, from Donald Trump's point of view, what are some immediate steps that he's willing to take day one, walking back into the presidency, to be able to give these border states back their sovereignty? It's important to me because what I've seen, we talked about how the Republican Party fumbled the ball with the abortion issue. Let's end this really acknowledging the blunder that the left did with the border, because there are these northern, there's these western, there's eastern seaboard states that decided they wanted to have sanctuary cities, and they
They
wanted
got
to
them.
sneer down their nose at those states that are right there on that border, right? When the Republican governors decided that they were going to take these individuals that are pouring across and ship them up to these cities that are sanctuary cities, we saw that hypocrisy super quick. I want to see how and if Donald Trump is willing to put that on the table for Joe Biden to have to address. So the border for me is there going to be an acknowledgement that we already have things in the books that are not right now being enforced that we might need to come off the high horse and start doing? And on the other side of that, looking at, hey, if you said that you don't have the capacity to take this influx, this 15, 10, 20,000 immigrants in, right? And absorb them into your city because it's stretching you thin. Now you have to acknowledge what it may be like with those, what, 5 or 6 states on the border, right? That have been screaming this at the top of their lungs for the last 25 years. That's what I want to see them talk about when they talk about the border. I don't want to just hear, oh, we'll just build walls and we'll just put more drones out there, right? I also want to hear a little accountability for the way in which they decided that they're going to play cruel politics and allow these individuals, I forgot what state that was, where they put the little barbed wire inside of the river to keep those immigrants from coming over. And in their state of desperation, they're still trying to swim over. And to my understanding, several lost their lives. And there was a big rift within that National Guard unit because some of them were like, hey, we're just doing our job. We were told we have to put this there and we had to stand on the other side. And others was like, yeah, but to what extent do we just blindly watch something that we know is heinous going to take place? So I want to hear those kind of things expanded
and
upon with the border.
I think that's part of the problem with the border the way it is that there's because there's no definitive policy, there's room for cruelty. I, because of what I've done for the last couple of years with my life and been a student of foreign policy and international relations, I think to some level you can have it. You can have it both ways. You can have a strong immigration policy, but you don't have to turn around and be cruel in your method of enforcement.
Mhm.
And that's where, again, I'm center left. This is where my hippie liberal comes in because 11 out of 10 times, if cruelty is the reason why you have to do something to get something done, I almost don't want no part of that. Then I start questioning it, like, what are your methods to be righteous? Or are your methods to be ridiculous? And then I have a harder problem. Remember, we had this conversation. People who claim to be of a religion, of our faith, and again, my heathen ass reads your book, and your book says you should be doing certain things, and then you live comfortably behind the banner of cruelty. And I'm almost like, this is why I don't even fuck with you. That's my little high horse, but I think there is a room in there for strong immigration as well as without having to be cruel. But because there's no uniform policy at the federal level, it allows each state to be a little fiefdom and decide for themselves, drown all the brown people in the river, or hey, everybody's welcome here until they get here. And they're like, oh, maybe we got to think about this.
Right.
For me, the top three issue voters I would be. Uh, so I do think we have a problem in our public school education. I really do, and I think a lot of it comes down to like how we fund public school. But I still think federal government has a responsibility to create a standard because we can love or hate public school. We can argue if it's working or not. We can decide we don't like certain things in the curriculum. But the fact that the United States has something like almost 97% literacy rate is a testament to national security, right? If you have ignorant people, you got a lot of other issues. Now we have functional ignorant people, people who can do certain things, but I think the basic tenets of public education are solid and moral and just, right? And any candidate that gets on TV and starts talking about disbanding the Department of Education, you better, if you want my vote, you better follow up with, well, but this is what I'm gonna do in this place. Because once there's no federal mandate to say you have to teach kids, myself, having graduated from a high school in inner city, recognize people from my demographic will be the first to go without a basic education, whatever that means. Right? I don't trust you privatize that private enterprise will see the value in a place where they're not turning an immediate profit. Things like education, that's a generational profit. You don't really see that till 5 to 10 years later. That's my first thing. Second thing is the economy. I don't care whatever numbers you talk about, how good the economy is, whatever, because CEO of Amazon made a whole lot of money now somehow tells me that the economy's doing good. Like I said, if I go to the grocery store and I spend $100 and I don't even have any meat in my cart, there's a problem. I want to know what you're going to do for the cost of commodities and the cost of living. Anybody who drives a car has seen what car insurance has done to the point it's ridiculous. And for me, healthcare. I believe in if we consider ourselves a modern country, healthcare should be a right. Now, I'm not saying everybody is entitled to cosmetic surgery, BBLs, butt lifts, whatever. But we're talking about the fact that like insulin should not cost what it costs if it's considered a life saving. I think the Biden administration was instrumental in bringing the cost down, but that's just one facet of it. I think there's no reason why healthcare should be people have to take Uber to the emergency room because they can't afford a fucking a ride in an
An
ambulance.
ambulance. Yeah.
There's something heinous and wrong about that. Again, so those are what I said. Is that two or three?
Healthy.
Those are the top three for me. And then everything else I can kind of go left or right and say, hey, you know, I'm pro this, but I don't need to have that or not. But those top three things are be what get me to go and
Yeah. All right. So on our way out there, on our way out of here, what is your prediction? Right when all this, when the shots fall, and the smoke's cleared, and it's the day after the election, just
so
your gut feeling, who do you think is gonna come out, even if it's by 100
so
votes?
let me play politician here. If you would ask me a month ago, I would have said Donald. I said Donald's going to get reelected. However, I don't think the GOP is going to I think they're going to lose seats in the House. If they get the Senate, it's not going to be by the margin that they believe that now they can roughshod and get the GOP agenda through. I think the GOP, and I've been saying this since the Tea Party, I think the GOP has been a fracturing party because there's too many now caucuses within the GOP to the point you used to could depend on the Republicans to be conservatives, whatever that means. But now there are so many different definitions of what conservative is that there is no room in the Republican Party for conservatives. They ousted Liz Cheney because she had the audacity to disagree with the guy at the top. She probably was 99% conservative in terms of her legislation, her speech, and her actions. Yes, she was connected because she was legacy. However, she walked the walk and talked the talk. So if conservatism is now based on do you bend the knee to Donald, I think that's not a great party platform because, like it or not, Donald Trump is 78, 79. Even if he gets reelected, he's not going to be around. So I said all to say, I don't know. I'm going to have to come back on you. I think the race for the president for the White House is Donald Trump's to lose. So barring any like really scandal or really shit where Biden can really capture people, because for both parties, there are no new Trump supporters and there are no new Biden supporters. So they're going to be playing to the people that were already there, right? And I think Biden supporters are more willing to sit this one out because they're just disgusted. So Trump can win not because he's got a better product or he's got new supporters or he was able to pull Biden supporters over, but because more of his people showed up and less of this guy's people showed up. But when you say to the House and the Senate, I think that's really a toss-up because I think the abortion is going to come. It's going to come down to abortion and the border, and depending on what state you're in, it's going to look either way. There are a lot of Republicans who have just said F it and they're retiring. And I think that's going to shake some shit up because now it's going to open up some districts that might have been considered Republican safe. What do you say about that? Who do you think is going to win? What party do you think is going to walk away?
So the only preface that I'll say is just devoid of any major scandal breakthrough or any of those court cases coming to a finality that will take care of itself. I think Donald's gonna make his way back.
What do you say about the Senate and the
Well, I believe that the House is I believe that the House is poised to flip back. You know, I feel it was short lived and the Republicans have been losing. That midterm election point really hurt them in the House, right? Because they were anticipating actually teasing out those seats, that majority that they have, because you know, just based on the sheer numbers, it's always about percentages. So when we're looking at the math in the Senate, and it's just 100, like we can just look at each senator as 1%, right? So getting 5% to swing either way is the difference between things being 45 to 55 versus 50-50, right? But in the House, because there's so many seats, right? If you don't get to a point where you have a 50 or 60, 70 House majority, you don't really control all mechanisms of the House that you have pointed out, right? Because there's all these
yeah,
little layers and there's
and
all these different
there's
rules.
going to always be a
Yeah,
conservative liberal or a Republican who's like, hey, listen, I represent, like, for example, my governor or my former governor is running for Senate.
yeah,
He wins the Senate, he'll be Republican with an R, but I promise you, he'll be Republican with a small R when you compare him to
right. So what I'm
Ted Cruz.
thinking is that the House, I mean the House is gonna flip back blue. I think that if Joe is out and loses Kamala, is that 50-50 tiebreak with Manchin actually retiring and not running for office again, I think that the Senate goes red. And I think that if nothing else, what you had spoken to and what I'm feeling exactly the same and many others are, is that if we're looking at if we're looking at politics in terms of how it affects us, the pump, the grocery store, and the inflation all across the board is hitting everyone outside of the millionaires and the trillionaires and the billionaires, et cetera, et cetera. So the one thing that you cannot refute is that 4 years ago, the economic vein that we were in was more productive and it was more advantageous to the average everyday person, right? Dealing with moving the federal minimum wage up in these different states that are moving up their minimum wage and all that stuff, all that means is that inflation is going to continue to go up. And we see it in car sales, we see it in the house market, right? We see it in the fact that there are so many more people that are working 2 or more jobs than 4 years ago. And so I agree with you that this is Donald's to lose because one thing for sure and one thing that's for certain is that I'm not confident that Joe Biden is going to reverse course on any of the things that he's done up to this point that has gotten us in this situation. So for me, that means that we either stay pat and even, or it's going to get worse within 4 years. And I don't think that people are so worried about how flagrant his Donald's rhetoric is or how incendiary some of his immediate thoughts are. I don't think that they're going to say, you know what, I would much rather have a meaningless existence wherever I'm at in America, but at least we don't have the racist president back in office, right? I don't think that's going to be enough of a deterrent this time. So I think that it goes red. So red, red, blue is where I'm at with it.
Red, red, blue. I like how we did that. I'm gonna say red. Red. I don't know if Senate blue. I agree, but it's sad
So
that
you're saying red, great. So right now you on red, purple, blue.
yeah. I'll get touch back with me as this
Yeah.
thing pans out a little bit more. We'll see,
Okay.
but because I'm interested to see how the abortion argument gets framed.
Hmm.
Because I think that's going to be the upset. I think there's going to be a lot of boo-boo faced Republicans going home, not because they weren't good representatives, but they got the stain of their party on them with that, and now they're going to be forced to pick a side.
Yeah.
So man, I don't know. The sad part is though, our election comes down 4 goddamn years later to two cantankerous men, two cantankerous Henri.
Old white men, bro. Put it on the table, man. We ain't got time to play around,
No,
man.
I wasn't even thinking. I was just thinking just the fact like, and then we can get out of here. Is that like what really I'm learning how to be okay with it because it used to really piss me off. I would have a group of friends who would make all these beautiful flowery statements why Trump is their guy or Biden is their guy, but and why the other guy is a problem. But you can flip that argument. And it like one thing Trump and I believe this because Trump is from Queens, New York, Biden's from fucking Scranton, PA, and they're within 5 years of each other. They're the same guy. They grew up in the same time. They came up in the same world with the same background. That they have the same core beliefs and core values. Maybe one is more uncouth than the other. We can argue that part, but these are the same fucking people. So when you have these people who are in the camp, like, no, my God, my savior will save us. No, the fuck he won't, or yes, he will. But you can swap it,
The
and that's the
reason
part that
why
really that
no,
I'm
I'm
learning
with
to
you on that.
accept because it used to bother me because I'm like, you said all this to say why Biden shouldn't be president, as if to say that's not who Trump is, or vice versa.
And so again, I said that with a great deal of intentionality. Yes, it did come across as just, just to kick this thing up a notch on our way out. But white men have to be included in that equation, not from a ethnic studies lens, but because the nation balked at having a white woman in office this year, period. If you put Donald up on the stage next to Nikki Haley, time and time and time again, hearing her talk circles around that dude. Yeah, she made a gaffe or two, but the fact that there was still an opportunity to have some change, even in the complexity of this race. And then I say man, because now it's at the point where the Dems weren't even willing to put anyone else in a different ethnic category in the equation. They immediately was like, oh, no, we're gonna go right back. We're gonna go with the incumbent president, right? It's not always customary for them to just run it back with the same guy and with the same vice president. And it's even less likely in many cases to just have the same vice president unless things are going great and you're really, really trying to groom that person to be the next your next new thing. But we already conceded that that's not the mission with Kamala, right? They fumbled the ball in that. So I threw the white male into the equation, not just because I'm a black man, and definitely not because I'm an angry black man, but because there still were so many opportunities to just tease out and to change the complexity and the complexion of this presidential race where it wouldn't have had to been some radical thing. I'm not saying they should have had Michelle Obama come and run against Biden, right? Or a third party dark horse candidate. It's just like it just really, really chaps my ass. I'm just gonna say this, that they put two guys up for us to have to decide that nobody really wants either of the two. Period. People just selling for party alignment. People just selling for political correctness. But you can't look at them two dudes in any way, shape, or form and be like, yeah, those are my president. Period. Even though even the deplorables don't like Donald. They just don't want to be, they don't want to have to deal with being labeled an anti-Trumper because that's like the antichrist.
Want to own the libs. Like
Yeah.
I said, it's more important. It's more important for your team to win than it is the actual legislating.
Yeah.
So that's why I said maybe we have the government we really fucking deserve. When it's all said and done, we talk about all this stuff about and this and that. No, like this was the game all along. It's just we graduated into a place at our age where now we can see it.
Right.
I don't know. We'll see. We got to come back again and we'll talk. Like I said, tell us what you think, world. You agree with us, great. But if you disagree, even better.
Yes,
We need to
sir.
get down how these kids say like and subscribe in the comments, but I don't know what that means. So I just said it.
you're
So
old,
a
you're
motherfucker might
old,
like and
you're
subscribe, and I'll be
old
like, I
dude.
don't know what to do now.
You're old dude. Yeah, you definitely an old head, man.
Okay, so you know what the
Yeah,
fuck that means?
yeah, I do, but only because I have a YouTube page, bro. I mean, a YouTube channel. That's the YouTube channel, right?
All right,
But
well,
okay,
fine.
so listen, we outstayed our welcome. You know what I'm saying? We got real life to get back to, man. It's always a great time to sit down and kick my feet with you, brother, man. We got to make sure we do this a little more often, man. Let's check in, man. Everyone else, one love. Have a great rest of your evening. If you got to this point, you really are rocking with us, right?
I'd have been
You
gave up
really,
on our stupid asses.
yeah,
I'd
yeah,
have been
you
like,
really
I'm mean,
rocking
fuck
with
these
us,
dudes.
and we appreciate that. But until the next time, hey, stay healthy, stay positive, and please, please stay thinking. Stay thinking.
And vote. Your
And
vote
vote.
does matter and it does count. Even if not at the federal level, get your
Yeah,
sheriff in there, get your DA in there, get your city ordinance in there.
rock the vote.
All right.
All right.